The Nile ran low that year, and the winds carried dust from the south when Pharaoh Amenemhat I, ruler of the two lands, fell. The court at Ichtoi, his shining capital, awoke to a silence deeper than any morning drum. Guards stood motionless before the palace gates. Messengers rode in every direction, but few knew what had truly happened inside the royal chambers that night. Amenemhat had reigned for decades. He had expanded Egypt's borders, filled her granaries, and raised temples where none had stood before. His death left a void no crown could easily fill. Word spread like a ripple through the corridors of power, whispers of treachery, of an ambush in the dark. No official dared speak openly, but everyone understood the danger. Among those in the palace that day was Sinuhe, a high-ranking courtier and officer in the royal guard. He had served the royal family faithfully all his life, accompanying the king's son, the crown prince Senusret, on campaigns to the southern frontiers. When the news of the pharaoh's death reached the army abroad, confusion seized every man. In Egypt, a dead king meant shifting loyalties, and one misstep could mean execution. Sinuhe heard the first rumors while camped near the Libyan border. A courier arrived, face pale beneath the desert sun, bearing sealed letters and broken seals. The message was brief. The pharaoh had gone to heaven. No explanation. No command to return. Then came the second message. Senusret had been summoned home, urgently, alone. That night Sinuhe could not sleep. He imagined palace corridors filled with blades, factions plotting succession, and the bodies of loyal servants left behind. Before dawn, he made a choice he would spend his life questioning. Without orders, without a word to anyone, Sinuhe fled into the desert. He rode north along the edge of the western sea, driven by panic more than reason. He told himself it was only for a day, perhaps two, just until the chaos in the capital settled. But the farther he rode, the more he feared returning. Each sunrise took him deeper into the wilderness and farther from the world he knew. By the time he reached the northeastern border of Egypt, his horse was exhausted and his heart hollow. Beyond the frontier lay the lands of Asia, a patchwork of deserts and hill tribes. There were no temples of Ra there, no priests, no law of Pharaoh. Crossing that border meant vanishing from history. Yet Sinuhe crossed. He wandered for days through barren valleys until hunger drove him to collapse. Traders found him half dead and gave him water. They were Asiatics, rough men with sun-scorched faces who spoke a language he barely understood. He told them he was an exile, a fugitive from Egypt. To his surprise, they showed respect. Egypt's name still carried power even in foreign sands. They led him eastward to a place called Retjenu, a land of mountains and acacia groves where chieftains ruled small tribes. There he was welcomed by a local prince named Amenemhat, who had once sent gifts to the Egyptian court. When Sinuhe told him of Amenemhat's death and of the new king, Senusret, Amenemhat nodded gravely. "Then Egypt has changed," he said. "Stay here. You will be safe among us." Sinuhe stayed. The years that followed turned exile into a kind of life. Amenemhat gave him land, cattle, and a wife from among his daughters. In time, Sinuhe became a respected elder, known for his fairness and his knowledge of Egypt's ways. He raised children who spoke the language of the desert, not the Nile. Yet even in his comfort, the thought of Egypt never left him. He would wake in the quiet hours before dawn and imagine the sound of temple chants along the river, the smell of lotus flowers carried by the morning wind. He thought of Senusret, now Pharaoh, who had once trusted him with his life. Did the king see him as a traitor, or had he been forgotten entirely? Years passed. Sinuhe grew rich in flocks and fields. When tribes fought in the hills, they sought his counsel. When raiders threatened Amenemhat's borders, Sinuhe led his warriors in defense of the land. His victories made him famous beyond Retjenu. Travelers began calling him the Egyptian prince who commands the East. Yet every triumph felt hollow, a shadow of the glory he had abandoned. One season, a challenger arrived, a mighty fighter from a neighboring tribe who demanded single combat. "I have heard of Sinuhe," the man shouted before the assembled warriors. "They say he is brave. Let him prove it before his gods. Sinuhe was old by then, but pride and memory pushed him forward. He took up his bow, his shield, and his curved blade. When the duel began, the desert fell silent. The challenger rushed him like a storm, but Sinuhe stepped aside and struck once, a clean blow to the throat. The man fell, and the crowd erupted in shouts. Amenemhat's people carried Sinuhe through the camp, praising him as a hero. That night he sat alone by his tent. Victory brought no joy, only exhaustion and the ache of years. He realized that every battle he had fought in exile had been to prove to himself that he still belonged somewhere. But in truth, he belonged nowhere. Then, one evening, a caravan arrived from Egypt. Among the merchants was a messenger bearing a sealed papyrus marked with the royal crest. The sight made Sinuhe's hands tremble. He broke the seal and read. The letter began with the formal greeting of Pharaoh Senusret. I know what you have done, Sinuhe. You fled when fear overcame you, but now that fear is ended. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt summons you to return. You shall not die in a foreign land. Come home to Egypt and be at peace. The words struck him harder than any blow. For decades he had dreamed of Egypt, yet the thought of returning terrified him. Would the Pharaoh truly forgive him? Or was the letter a snare to bring him back in chains? Still, the longing was stronger than fear. He gathered his family and told them he must go. His wife wept, his sons argued, but Sinuhe knew the decision was already made. He left them with his wealth and his blessing and joined a merchant caravan heading west toward the Nile. The journey was long and uncertain, but each day the desert seemed less harsh, as if guiding him home. When at last the river appeared, glittering beneath the sun, Sinuhe knelt and pressed his hands into the sand. He whispered a prayer to the gods of his youth, the same gods he had betrayed by leaving. At the border fortress, Egyptian soldiers met him with formal respect. They gave him water and fresh linen robes, as if he were still a court official returning from a long mission. He was escorted south to Ichtoy, where Senusret's palace gleamed in the light of afternoon. The court had changed since the days of Amenemhat. Younger faces filled the halls, new banners hung from the columns, but the air carried the same solemn majesty. Sinuhe was led before the throne, where Pharaoh Senusret sat crowned in gold and white. The old courtier bowed low, his face to the floor. Life, prosperity, health to you, great king of Egypt, he said, voice shaking. I am a man who fled from fear. Let me die in your sight that my name may rest in the land of my fathers. The Pharaoh regarded him for a long moment. Then he spoke, not in anger but in quiet recognition. You have wandered far, Sinuhe. Yet Egypt is a mother who never forgets her children. You shall live here again and no harm will come to you. He ordered that a house be built for Sinuhe in the necropolis near the royal tombs, so that when death came, he would rest among the honored dead of Egypt. Royal craftsmen were assigned to design his tomb, its walls painted with scenes of his life, his journey, his battles, his return. Sinuhe spent his final years in peace. He walked once more along the banks of the Nile, watched the harvesters sing in the fields, and gave offerings at the temples. Sometimes the young officials would ask him about the lands beyond Egypt, about the deserts and tribes of Asia. He would tell them, but his eyes always drifted toward the horizon. In the evening, he wrote his memories on papyrus, perhaps knowing that one day others would read them. He wrote not of conquest or riches, but of fear, exile, and forgiveness. He wrote of a man who lost everything except the hope of returning home. When death finally came, it was gentle. The priests washed him, wrapped him in fine linen, and placed him in the tomb the Pharaoh had prepared. On the walls, the artisans carved a simple inscription. Sinuhe, servant of the royal house, who fled from Egypt and returned in peace. He saw the sunrise of two worlds, the desert and the Nile, and rests now in the eternal West. Long after the kingdoms of Egypt rose and fell, travelers who passed the necropolis near Lisht would find the faint outline of a name on stone, half erased by time. They would not know his face, nor the sound of his voice. But somewhere in the silence of the desert, the story of Sinuhe endured, the tale of a man who fled his homeland, wandered among strangers, and was forgiven by the land that made him. His life became a lesson carried through centuries, that even in exile, the heart remembers where it began, that mercy can outlast fear, and that to return home is the greatest victory of all.